Hey, Mr. Binks, you know how I've been busy reading an amazing book called Operation Ark. Well, guess what? We're jumping on Zoom now to talk to the author himself, the amazing Pen Farthing, about his exit from Afghanistan and about how he's rebuilding his passion for helping cats, dogs, and people in war zones in Ukraine. I'm Anna Webb. Welcome to A Dog's Life. Pen Farthing, gosh, what a delight it is that you've joined me on A Dog's Life.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's a huge honour. Thank you.
No, the honour's all mine because, what we're about to talk about was such a landmark moment, really, in history. Would you agree?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I was actually just contemplating it this morning. It's 3 years ago, literally to the day.
Yes,
The
I
day.
realised that yesterday. Do you know
Yeah.
that, Pen? Sorry to cut across you. That's really unprofessional. But I was rereading your book, which is basically the nub of this episode, the book that you've written about Operation Ark. And I realised it absolutely was, I think, yesterday, wasn't it?
Well, so yesterday was the day we were actually turned around at the airport by the Taliban commander, and also sadly the day that the ISIS suicide bomber detonated at the Abbey Gate. So 170 people, including 13 US Marines, died yesterday, 3 years ago. And there's been no mention of it. I've been scouring the news, having a look, and it's like it's just been forgotten about already, the whole episode, which to me is mind-boggling. I just can't get my head around it, actually, to be fair, that there's been nothing about what happened 3 years ago and about 20 years of sadly sacrificed by British, American, Canadian and coalition troops, and what happened to the Afghan people. So if I sound like I'm ranting, it's because I'm kind of just confused by it all, that no one seems to care anymore.
I'm not surprised by your anger, to be honest. And, the world is so full of anger at the moment. But in your book, it's a wonderful release in a way for you. I mean, apart from being so interested in the book, you really go into the build-up of America and the UK saying we're moving out, weren't they? It was this sudden announcement that totally shook the whole world, not only on a massive big scale, but for you with Nowzad that you'd built after your term fighting as a commando in the Marines. You basically stayed out there because of your love of dogs, right?
Yeah, and it was something that started off when I was serving there as a Marine, that I realized, yes, our tour of duty was bringing security to the area. But for me, it just wasn't enough. And I wanted to do, I don't know, at the time, I couldn't really place my finger on it, but I knew I wanted to do something for the Afghan people. I wanted to do something for, the just thousands upon thousands of stray dogs. And then starting that charity, Nowzad, the animal welfare aspect of it, where we were fighting rabies, which is a fatal disease to obviously both humans and dogs, but is spread by dogs. We realized that actually we could make a difference for both, by humanely vaccinating and neutering the dog population. We'd then be helping the people because less people would be being bitten by a rabid dog. So I realized that's kind of where my calling was. And to go back to what you just said about, the sudden withdrawal, we'd watched for nearly 20 years now, Afghanistan was changing. Young women were going to school. There was nearly 100,000 women in education, full-time education in 2021, compared to nearly, I think it was just 5,000 back in, 20 years previously in 2001. So we'd seen the change, that we'd seen the dynamics changing on Kabul streets, and how the West, the governments of the West just suddenly went, well, that's it. We just don't care anymore. I can't fathom. I still can't figure it out myself, why. And then we didn't even make any deals. It's just we left. That's it. Goodbye. I don't understand it, and I still can't. I can't just comprehend it. I have to be honest.
No, absolutely. Really extraordinary. And of course, in a way, history could be repeating itself, but we'll get to that in a little bit in the podcast now. But going back there, if you don't mind going back a bit,
Yeah.
Pen, obviously it was hitting the news the whole time. And for me, looking at this as a dog lover and someone who knew the charity when you were working in Afghanistan and setting it up and reuniting soldiers with the dogs that had been their companions, their confidants, their morale boosters through their individual tours when they were out there fighting the Taliban. You helped dogs, but as you just said there, you really help people, but you were labeled as this people hater that chose animals over people, and nothing could have been further from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be kind of blowing my own trumpet at all, but I actually sat and yesterday and I was thinking about it all, and I realised that when Theresa May was Prime Minister, she'd actually agreed to me being awarded for the UK's Points of Light winner, and I was the first ever one. And she actually wrote me this personal letter that stated about our animal welfare work, which actually helped the Afghan people. And she was proud and she was really happy to award me this Points of Light winner. And I sat there and thought about it, and then just a few years later, the British government had labelled me as this selfish person who only cares about dogs, and they don't even pot that about any of our work. It's just this stupid Brit who's an Afghan dog fancier. I think that's how they described me in one press release. So yeah, it hurt. It definitely hurt, and it just kind of belittled everything we've been doing for the last 17 years. All the time, the effort our supporters had put in. People have been out fundraising for us because they knew what we did, what we were part of, and what we were trying to achieve. So it just belittled everything, not just me, and for that I can't forgive them. And again, like I said, it does hurt, and I was just sat yesterday thinking about it, going, wow, I still can't believe the British government did that to me.
I know, but in a way, it's about rising above it, because I think, they all know. And as you say in the book quite a bit, the truth will out. And I think the book, Operation Ark, does out the truth. But it's a roller coaster read, because I appreciate some bits you haven't kept in, for, legal reasons, but it cuts a pretty raw picture of what was going on. You capture the panic, the fear, the worry. And at that moment when, how in the book do you put it, when the man with the taxi turns up and you describe him, and he's like this kind of person out of a film, it seems, that and you can't disclose how you got him and how he was able to navigate the roads to remind me of the lovely lady who was almost about to give birth. And of course, with Kaiser, your wife, you were so determined to get these two women and her son to the airport, and obviously to get on a plane, one to Norway and one to America. And whilst you stayed to either face the consequences of being stoned to death by the Taliban, or hopefully getting out of there with over 100 cats and dogs.
Yeah, there's something you just said. I just want to go back to, if I can, that you said about best to rise above it. But, some of it I just can't. I've tried for the last 3 years and I just can't do it. The hurt and the pain from that experience 3 years ago it's still so raw. And I really do try at times, think, well, I just got to ignore it, just, crack on. But I can't. It sits with me and it's just there. And I still, like I said, I can't get my head around, how it went the way it did. And you've just talked there about, getting obviously Kaiser out, getting Najwa out, she's pregnant, 32 weeks. And, if that's not showing that, our priority was people, I don't know what else to do. Back here in England now, we, our 67 staff, they're here. That, there's pictures of us all. I took pictures of, the children walking to school once they'd, started their process to be, integrated into, UK society, and people still doubt whether they are real. Yeah, so it is very deep. I can't just rise above it because I don't know what else I have to do to prove that it wasn't pets over people. It was actually people and animals. So
Well, exactly. But you see, the thing is, Pen, it wasn't your fault. And then, finally, when you get to the massive plane, and because you are obviously a real leader, you've galvanized all these different troops. You've got American army people, you've got Canadian army people in the inner sanctum of the airport, which was like near on impossible to get to due to the chaos and the panic surrounding the whole, get out of Kabul now, wasn't it? You synchronized everything and then you got onto the plane and you were the only person, the only human being in the cabin.
yeah, I mean, we've got the text messages and emails that we sent to the Home Office, asking or basically pleading, saying, look, we've got spare seats. Our aircraft could cater for 130 people. And if we'd got our staff in there, that would have been, 67 plus me. So we still had plenty of spare seats, and we've got their replies saying no. Can you imagine that if they had actually said yes, how the narrative would have changed, when we landed at Heathrow with, our plane that we'd used to help the British government evacuate people. There was no way they were going to let that play out. Absolutely no way. So, they were always going to say no to us because we couldn't be seen to actually be helping them out of the chaos they had created.
Really, it was that it's that simple. Is that what yeah, is it that
Totally,
simple?
but totally what, myself, the rest of the, evac committee, we've sat down and we've realized, that if we'd actually then said, yeah, we need your seats, then, it could have been totally turned on its head. Guy rescuing dogs actually helps British government rescue people. It would have been a completely different narrative and one that they didn't want because it would have shown the incompetencies that sadly, were there for everybody to see that the British government were doing. So, yeah, like I said, it's so when I sit and when I was sat doing the research for the book and going over all our emails, our WhatsApps, all the messages, there was so much that we just sat there and went, wow, actually, when you think about this, I hadn't really thought about it in detail at the time. And now it's just like, wow, look at that message where they've blatantly said no. Listen to the voicemails of the, army colonel telling me not to come into the Abbey Gate. The British government are telling one thing in the press. Yes, we've said he can go. Yeah, I've got a message from the commander actually managing the gate telling me not to come. So, yeah, all of that, when I put it together, it kind of does. Like I said, it sits very raw at the moment, even now, 3 years on.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, Pen, you've written the book in this time. And as you've just said, you've gone over everything. So I think it's brought it all up again, to be released out of you into this book, which I've got to say to everyone, it's a must-have read. It really is. I mean, it's so fast-paced written that you're thinking, crikey, you're on the edge of your sofa. I'm telling you. Let's face it, you've been at gunpoint at least 3 times in the book. How does it feel, Pen, to have an AK-47 placed on your head?
How does it feel?
How does it feel?
Yeah. It, it that that wasn't the scariest moments, that I have to admit. That was something that happened. It happened, and I didn't honestly know where it was going to go. Which way it was going to go. I just had to hope that they weren't going to do anything silly like pull the trigger. The worst bits, totally and utterly, was the not knowing if it didn't work. I thought when we couldn't get our staff in, what's going to happen to them now? Young Hamida, what's going to happen to her? Um, and sadly now, everything that we thought might happen has been proven true. Women aren't allowed to be educated. They're going to be staying in the home. They're going to be married off. And when I got into the airport with the dogs and cats, what would happen if that plane can't land? What the heck do I do now? How I've got 2 trucks here. I can only drive one. So I couldn't just drive out the gate because I'd have to leave a truck behind. I was like, what? what do I do if this now all goes completely wrong and the aircraft can't land? That to me was the scariest moments, when I was sat just trying to focus on that, and then I'd distract myself and I start messaging people just to not think about that, because I was like, right, there is no solution to that answer. So that question. So you've got to just move on, do something else. Um,
So describe the moment when the big cargo plane did actually hit the ground.
well, it was a long build up. We were actually, I and the dogs were sat in that airport for over 24 hours. Yeah, and the dogs were all in their crates, all the cats were in their crates. I couldn't take them out because there was just me. And they were stacked, kind of like 4 or 5 high on the back of that truck. So there's no way I could, on my own, get the ones at the top, you know, without obviously collapsing the whole thing. So they all just sat in there, and there's nothing I could do about it. It's 40 degrees C. It was just stifling heat, and we sat there, and I messaged the team back here in the UK, and they're trying to get permissions, because even though the British government had said, yes, right, you can land your plane, what we never realized, because no one told us, because, we've never landed a plane before. Well, actually, you need diplomatic clearance for all the countries your plane's going to fly over. So our team is desperately trying to get all of these clearances for our aircraft from where it took off to land in Kabul, to then take off again and fly to Tashkent. We never realized we actually had to do all those clearances. So we're trying to wake people up in embassies. It was madness. And so I'm sat there and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and I'm being told by our team, not by the military, that the plane is en route. They're 15 minutes out from Kabul. And so I'm just stood outside the hangar where the dogs and cats were parked up in the 2 trucks, and I'm just looking for any dot I can see in the sky that's getting a little bit bigger. And it wasn't just, the time had gone past. I was looking at my watch. I was like, well, that's 15 minutes gone. That's 20 minutes gone. Where the heck is it? And I'm messaging the people back home. They said, look, we're told it's en route. It's en route. And then finally, and it wasn't a huge cargo plane. It was actually basically an old private jet of a certain dictator from that part of the world, that had a cargo hold and seating for 130 people. And the only reason I knew it was different from any of the military planes, because this one was kind of more or less painted gold.
Oh,
So I saw it land. You're coming into land. I was just like, and I was being told from the team back home, look, it's gold colored. You can't miss it. And I was like, I can see it. And I was literally just jumping up and down. It was a crazy moment of, wow, this is actually worked. Yeah, I don't have any other words to describe. Just it, it, I didn't believe it until I saw that thing land on the tarmac of Kabul airport. And then I was like texting everybody back in the UK, the team, going, it's here. But I think I might have used a few other choice words instead to actually say it's here. But yeah.
no, I'm sure. Gosh, I would have done as well, understandably. And then, of course, because you must have been a bit worried that some of the dogs and cats may have passed out in the heat, not being able to give them a
Yeah, yeah.
drink.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, thankfully the US Air Force fire team had come round in their big shiny red fire truck. And I don't think people understand this. I've had some people ask me saying, why did the Americans take a big fire truck out there? Every military base in Afghanistan, that obviously for aircraft, your Bagrams, your Kandahar, Kabul, then they have a proper US military fire team there. So they have, back in the day, they'd brought in a big fire truck. So this was Kabul Airport's fire truck. That's why they were in one. So they drove it over, and then they hadn't, they were like, well, yeah, we can help you. And so with one of their hoses, they actually helped to water the dogs and cats, and get them some, vital hydration. So I wasn't too worried about them now, dying of dehydration. They were definitely hungry. They hadn't eaten in probably 2 days, but I thought that's a price, worth paying if they get out of here and loving homes in the West. It was I'm wondering, about the shock and the trauma of it all. How would they cope? Thankfully, though, dogs and cats are probably more resilient than we give them credit for, and all of them came back, more or less fine. So, yeah, them. I was just worried at the time, what they're going to be like mentally. They've been shut away, and remember, they weren't just one to a crate. a normal sized travel crate that would have one dog in it, in our case had three,
Yeah.
crammed into the crate, because otherwise we'd have had to leave, more behind than we did. So
Yeah, and you did leave some behind. You re-released some of the dogs that maybe had some deeper behavioral issues to make them a bit unrehomable. Is that right?
yeah, we had to make a choice. I only had X amount of crates, but I had, um, a lot more dogs and cats. So we looked, and it was one of the most horrendous days ever when we're looking at this spreadsheet and we're trying to figure out which dogs would fit in which crates, but also which dogs would probably get on with the other dog in such a confined space for such a long period of time.
Yeah.
And we, yeah, because it's all well and good saying, well, this dog goes with that dog. Yeah, until they're actually getting annoyed with each other. And then, they start fighting. So we had to make a decision. And so sadly, the older dogs that had been in our care a long time, we knew wouldn't survive out in the street. So we actually put them to sleep. Um, and everybody was just teary eyed at the clinic then, because we'd spent so many years looking after them, and we thought they were going to live their days out, at Nowzad in safety. But when the clinic is about to disappear, where would you put them? So we said goodbye to those dogs, and then some of the others that we knew wouldn't really settle that well, or we needed a lot more time to get them to be at a point where we could adopt them out. We sadly had to release them onto the streets because we knew they'd have a fighting chance of surviving in their own way. So yeah, that was a really bad day, that making those decisions. And then we try to pick ourselves up by looking at the positive. Right, we've got these dogs, though, we know we can get out. So right, let's start fitting them in crates, and and going through the drills of how do we load an aircraft, because none of us had loaded an aircraft before. And whatever, again, I think what everybody kind of didn't realize was Kabul Airport wasn't Kabul Airport anymore. It was just a military entrance to a runway. So there's no loading crew, there's no platforms to lift the dogs up or anything. There is just literally you, and obviously I hoped I had my staff, who we would be lifting these crates into the back of an aircraft. There'd be no load master, no nothing. So we had to basically get help from. We ended up talking to a couple of aviation experts for cargo, and they were teaching us how we balanced out pallets on the back of in a cargo hold, so that the pilot would actually be able to take off without the aircraft flipping upside down because all the weight's on one side. So
Oh my gosh. I mean, listen, I mean, it's amazing, Pen. I mean, you deserve more medals than anybody, for what you did, and all animal lovers. I can't fathom all this, negativity to this. Even if you hadn't, I'm going to say something now. Even if you hadn't brought all your staff over, and even if you hadn't done all the education programs that you've done over, what was it, 17 years out?
17 years, yeah, we'd been
Yeah,
doing. I mean,
teaching people to speak English, helping people, learn how to become vets, encouraging and supporting women. I mean, obviously, as a woman myself, that was a major part of it all, I thought, for myself, that I thought was really great, and that you really genuinely did care, about everybody out there, and the worry that the women had, and how when the Taliban were kind of like skirting the circumference of the Nowzad area, there was that moment when the Taliban had come really close to you, and there was this
yep,
worry, gosh, all the women had to run upstairs and quickly change to be in their appropriate clothing.
yeah,
Yeah, otherwise heaven knows what would have happened to them, in Western outfits or in a Western veterinary outfit. You can't do that. You can't be a vet. You're a woman. It just really, the books really brought it all to life to me. I was there on Twitter, I was retweeting, we covered it on the radio show. It became so close to me in reading this book. But yeah, can you imagine taking off and then flipping upside down? I mean, what a thought.
There was such a team effort. I can't take credit at all for all of it. The amount of people we had helping us out, trying to figure out all the logistics. Like I said, trying to figure out, well, who do you ask for diplomatic clearance to fly a plane into Tashkent? It was it was madness, you know, and all the people who donated, you know, for a start, you know, whatever we want to do, unless people had donated, we wouldn't have got anywhere, you know. So everybody who actually believed in what we did and helped in their own way, you know, they all need thanks too. It's not just me at all, because we couldn't have done anything without all those moving parts actually coming together at the right time, you know, in coordination to pull it off. You know, I do sit sometimes and just, you know, with Ragnar, yeah, one of the dogs that was on Operation Ark, and I do just sit with him sometimes and think, how the hell did we do that?
Well,
How am I sat here and how are you sat here, dog? I don't understand how that all worked. That it is a little bit crazy, I know.
well, it was so short. What was it? 2 weeks you had, really?
Yeah, we went from basically, you know, knowing that Kabul was about to fall to, you know, arriving in England was more or less exactly 14 days.
That you maneuvered this huge operation, and of course, yes, it was everyone involved, and I'm sure a lot of people in different countries, particularly the US, Canada, and the UK, I would imagine, really, gunning for you, and all the people that were waiting for their dogs, because you were also, before that 2 weeks, you were, organizing for key dogs to fly to America or wherever and be reunited with the particular soldier that had created the bond with a particular dog, right? So,
Yeah, that was, you know, one of our core kind of missions of Nowzad, next to our rabies prevention, was actually reuniting the dogs and cats with the soldiers who'd bonded with them out on the, you know, the front lines in Afghanistan. And, you know, seeing that soldier's face when you turn up, you know, and there's this dog that he hasn't seen in, you know, 3 or 4 months, is just priceless. You know, it was an amazing part of our work, you know, and that's all stopped now. You know, obviously now there's no more coalition troops in Afghanistan. Well, you know, we don't do any of those rescues anymore. So yeah, yeah, just seeing that, I'll always remember, you know, like I said, the face of the soldier when you turned up with the dog or cat that they'd bonded with for nearly a year in Afghanistan and thought they're never going to see again. It was just, you know, a magical moment. And yeah, like I said, we don't do that anymore. So, you know, all of that is gone. Yeah, that's a part of Nowzad that, you know, no longer exists.
well, I think Nowzad, along with the whole Afghanistan situation, will always, be remembered in history, Pen. But, moving into the present, you are channeling your energy, your love for dogs, and your military prowess, shall I say, to organize big maneuvers. You're channeling all of this to help dogs, cats, and indeed people in Ukraine.
Yeah, but so after Operation Ark, we came back and we were in a bit of a, I don't know, no man's land, I guess. You know, we thought our operations in Afghanistan were over. We didn't have a clinic. All of that had gone. Um, and you know, we were sadly being investigated by the Charity Commission. We were in a foreign select committee inquiry. Um, you know, which all of them ultimately, you know, nearly 10 months after they started, all came back with, you know, Nowzad had done absolutely nothing wrong. And we were, you know, right to do what we did, which obviously we knew at the start of the investigations, but sadly it took 10 months for us to have our names cleared publicly. And so we didn't know what to do. And we all watched the same as the rest of the world, I think, in complete horror as Russia just invaded Ukraine. And then we start hearing all the stories of the dog and cat shelters in the east of the country and up near around Kiev that were suffering now because the Russians had cut off the supply lines. And so shelters couldn't get food, that people were trying to evacuate animals. And we realized, well, you know, we kind of worked in a war zone for the last 17 odd years. You know, we've got a lot of experience in that field. So can we apply that to Ukraine? And that's why we ended up going, because at the time we were like, what is Nowzad now? What's Nowzad going to do now that we're not in Afghanistan? And that's why we ended up there.
Oh, brilliant. And, I think that's so important, because the horror stories, particularly at the beginning of the invasion, was dreadful. We were having on the radio, we were having weekly updates with another great organization that I'm sure your paths will cross if they haven't already. It's called the Centaurus Foundation.
Okay.
And yeah, and they were down at the south of Poland, basically, at the border down there, and they set up a big camp and operation for the cats and dogs because people were just leaving them at the border because the dog wasn't allowed to cross the border. So can you imagine just leaving your dog behind? I mean, I wouldn't have done it. I don't
Yeah,
think
I
I
know.
could
I
have
mean,
done
it's
it.
kind of, you have to, I guess, realize how desperate people are if, if that's the case. And, we found out in places like Irpin, which is just west of Kiev, and Bucha, once, the Russians were going into those areas, that, people were fleeing. And sadly, for whatever reason, they left behind their dogs, and we would come across some that were still in their outside pens. Yeah, and they'd been there for like 3 weeks, no food, no water, and we were finding them, in a house that obviously they used to, live in, that had been completely destroyed by the fighting. So, we'd wonder and say, why have the people just left the dog and that? But then, obviously you start thinking about it, and well, were those people actually killed? Were they away from home when the Russians, were coming up the road, and obviously they couldn't return? So yeah, it's horrible to see, the consequences of war, for the animals as well as the people. It's something that, is very hard to comprehend at times.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I talked about it on air actually. There was a photograph, I think it was in the Telegraph, and this huge block of flats had been bombed. I can't remember where. And there was this man, and it was his story that he'd rushed into the demolished building. Oh God, to salvage the body, of his dead cat. And the photo, his massive photo, was just him clutching his dead cat, and oh, I don't know, it still triggers me actually. That was his best friend.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, like, yourself, like me, like, all of our supporters, the people who listen to your podcast, they, the dog or cat within the family is part of the family, isn't it? It's not, it's not just an animal that lives in the house. It's part of the family. And, and so when, for us, and hopefully in normal times, when it's time for us to say goodbye, it's heart wrenching. So to actually lose your dog or cat in something as horrific as, a missile attack by Russia, of course that's going to be devastating for them. And, and rightly so, people, need to know what's going on out there, because, we see this all the time with people either split up from their animals, or sadly, their animals didn't survive. It is just an absolutely horrific situation. Sadly, after yesterday's attack across Ukraine, by Russia, it's not getting any easier, and it's definitely not getting any safer.
No, so is there like a Nowzad setup now near Kiev? Is this going to be your kind of new base, or are you going to be commuting, as it were, from the UK over there and overseeing it, or what's the plan?
So we've actually got our office and warehouse is actually in Lviv, and Lviv is in western Ukraine. The reason we've set up there is just it's a little bit safer than obviously being in the main capital, Kyiv, or further east. So that's where all our supplies come into. That's where the operation is managed from. And then from there, we will travel out to basically the areas that we're needed. So we currently have some shelters that we've helped to rebuild. We're resupplying with food and medical supplies. And we've also got a TMVR, trap, vaccinate, neuter, return programs ongoing at the moment, because sadly, Ukraine has had an outbreak of rabies.
Oh,
With all of this, the fighting, the disruption, obviously in Ukrainian infrastructure, and just, the normal daily life, that, a lot of the TMVR programs that were running have not been able to do so. So, rabies sadly has sprung up from obviously the ruins of the fighting. And so that's one of the things we're doing at the moment now. So everything we do is geared around currently to helping the Ukrainians who have stayed rather than those who have fled. So we're trying to continue. We're supporting those shelters that have got, hundreds of dogs and cats. Where there's nowhere to adopt them to at the moment. You can't just bring them all over to England, or into Europe, because Europe's been flooded with dogs and cats from Ukraine. So it's trying to help those shelters survive to hopefully the end of the war, when normality will eventually return and people within Ukraine can start adopting again. When that will be, obviously, is anybody's guess, sadly.
Well, yes, particularly as you say, after the current news and so on, and I guess as well. Hopefully, I can say this: the worry of Donald Trump perhaps being re-elected. Yeah, I don't think that's going to help, is it, Pen?
Well, no, I mean it is very we talk to a lot of Ukrainians, especially those who live over in the east. What is going to happen? And it's incredibly sad, isn't it, that just one person can determine the outcome, of a whole populace. We've seen that, in Afghanistan with, what happened 3 years ago. You know, basically, well, I mean, ultimately that was Donald Trump in the first place, and then Biden followed through on it. And then again, we're now under the threat that potentially, Donald Trump could just click his fingers and cut off all funding to Ukraine, and suddenly, the war is over, and Russia can keeps all of those areas that it invaded. It's People are so concerned about that we talk to, and a lot of our shelters that we're supporting are in some of those areas that could potentially then become obviously Russian. So it is an absolutely devastating kind of thought process for a lot of Ukrainians that that could potentially happen because one person decides it. It
Mm.
it's the world sometimes to me does not make sense. I know that much.
Yes, I know. I think at the moment, I think so many people do think that, but it's important, to air what you are doing, Pen. To get ongoing support. I think that's the one thing everyone can do to clear their conscience a little bit. Where most people can't go out there and be on the ground and do something really positive in actual real life, but you can donate and be totally assured that your funds are going to go to the right place to help those dogs, cats, and those people around them. That's the thing, because you're still about community, which you were all about in Afghanistan. So nothing's changed really, just the location.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing we've always prided ourselves on is we're trying to be as transparent as we absolutely possibly can be, so people see where their money goes. And for me, the most important part of this whole process, are the people who donate. They may think, well, there's nothing I'm not doing anything. Well, just sitting down and taking the time to read about what we do as a charity, and then actually saying, okay, I'll go with that. I'm going to make a donation. Is to me, it's the most important part of it, because without those funds, none of this happens. None of the dogs and cats can be supported, whether it's through operations or whether it's just receiving a rabies vaccination. One, so that dog itself doesn't have to go through the absolutely horrendous consequences of, catching rabies and dying this horrific death from it,
Mm.
or the dog actually spreads the disease to a human. So for me, that's so important that we do show people, what we do, how we do it, and they have complete confidence in that, and that's something we'll always continue to do as a charity.
Oh gosh, it's amazing, Pen. I think it's great what you do. I really genuinely do. And you're right, we're so lucky in the UK. I mean, touching wood here that we never do get rabies. As an island, we've managed to escape it, haven't we, for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's only a question of time, I think, before that goes wrong. But fingers crossed it won't. So yeah, it's the only disease that will kill everyone in their vicinity, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, it's a horrific disease, and we've seen it in Afghanistan, and we've seen it with people, sadly. Uh,
Oh, that must be awful. I mean, it must be so awful. It must be so awful knowing that you're definitely going to die and there is absolutely nothing anyone can do.
yeah, I mean, some people I don't think realize, rabies is 99.9% fatal once symptoms show. And what we've seen in Afghanistan, we used to have a hotline for people because there was only a couple of hospitals that actually carried the rabies vaccine. So if somebody thought, their child had been bitten by a dog with, they used to call it mad dog disease, with mad dog disease, then they hopefully they'd seen our notes as we had a poster campaign. We'd always be putting posters up around Kabul. Your child bitten, ring this number immediately. and then get them to that hospital so the child can be vaccinated. Because you've only got 24 hours to be vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated within that 24-hour window, then there's a good chance that if it is rabies, yes, that's it. You're not going to make it. And people would ring us, a week after their child had been bitten, and we'd been out in that area and we'd collected dogs in that sadly did have rabies. So yeah, it's horrendous to see when that you could have done for $35. All the children could have been vaccinated, per child, but it doesn't happen. So and there's dogs on the streets, and everywhere in Kabul. So it's something that we've seen, and we don't want that to now happen in Ukraine and people trying to survive this war, and also now have to try and survive an outbreak of rabies. It's just something else that they don't need.
Yeah, 100%. And you don't want fear of dogs coming back, or cats. I mean, cats can get rabies in the same way, and a scratch from a cat, I guess,
Yes.
would.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So our vaccination programs always include cats as well. I tend to talk more about dogs just because cats don't like me. So
I'm sure they do, Pen. I'll tell you what, I'm a
I,
bit of an evangelist at the moment for cats. Cats, yeah, in the last 14 years have played quite a major part in my life. And oh yeah, I love cats.
I'm afraid they don't like me. I went once. We adopted a cow out to a lady in America, and I happened to be given a talk there, a couple of years later, and she'd seen, and so she kept messaging on social media, like, look, when you come to do your talk, you've got to come and see this cat. And I was like, okay, I'll come and see the cat. So I went, after I did the talk, I went round to a house apartment, and she was like, all right, the cat's gonna be so happy to see you. And I literally walked in the door, and as I walked in the door, this cat launched itself from like the table where it's perched onto my chest, bit me as hard as it possibly could, and then just pushed away and ran out through the door and disappeared into the garden. And the woman was horrified, and I'm stood there with blood coming through my t-shirt. And I was like, yeah, cats don't actually like me.
Oh, that's so funny. I'm sure it was just that one cat. I know, but they can bite. I mean, they're hunters, cats,
I
and
know
they
it looked like it saw me. I don't know if it thought I was taking it back to Afghanistan or something.
perhaps it did. You see, that's the thing. I
That's
mean,
my only like defense I have in that was like, yeah, maybe it actually thought I was trying to take it back. So this lady was horrified. So we kind of like sat there, had a cup of tea, and then the cat wouldn't come back in the house, and I was like, "Oops, sorry."
well, well, maybe it was that actually. You never know. Well, they're so bright, you really don't know. But listen, no, I mean, the work for cats as well is great. Well, look, Pen, look, gosh, I mean, we could talk for absolutely ages. Yeah, I found the book Operation Ark. You've laid your soul bare in it, really, and I think that's so humbling to do. And the human beings in this world support you, Pen. I do believe that, but it is well worth reading. So where can people get the book?
Well, yeah, thank you for all your very kind words about the book. I truly appreciate that, Anna. Thank you. It's the book is now for sale. They can get it from Amazon. They can order it through their bookshops. We're published by an independent publisher called Claret Press. So sadly, we don't have the funds of a big one of these big publishing houses, because none of them would publish me. They actually said I was too toxic. That was their excuse for not taking the book on. So thankfully, the wonderful people at Claret Press said they would. So it's on Amazon. You can also get it from the Nowzad website, but if you want it from your local bookstore, they'd have to order it in. So and all the proceeds from the book, they go into the charity. They don't come to me. So yeah, that'd be fabulous if you want to read the true story of what happened 3 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the perfect Christmas present. I know I should mention Christmas, but it's not that far away. So I think
Did you
everyone.
just mention Christmas in August, Anna?
Well, I did actually, because it's true that it will be here, and you've got to think of your Christmas presents, and this one is a Christmas present.
I may have to end this podcast right now if you're talking about Christmas. I'm sorry.
Well,
there are rules. There
are rules. I must
mention
obey the rules.
October is the earliest you can mention Christmas.
Okay. Okay, I'll rectify that. But it's a good book to read at any time of the year. How's that?
Yay, brilliant. That sounds
Yay!
happy days.
Well, listen, thanks, Pen, and keep us posted on what's going on in Ukraine. And you're more than welcome to come back on the pod anytime. So stay in touch.
No, thank you so much. It's been a blast. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Pen.
Thank you. Take care.
That's our show, Mr. Binks. What did you think? Yes, I know you are very lucky to be safe living in London. And you're right, it's time for Woof of the Week. Operation Ark is most certainly a must-have read for anyone who cares about dogs, cats, and people engulfed by war. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, go on, please rate and review this episode, as it really makes a difference. Thanks, of course, to Pen Farthing for sparing the time to join us today, and all the links are in the show notes. Of course, thanks again to Mike Hansen, my amazing producer, for all of the music and production as ever. And you can find out more about him at Pod People UK. And why not check out my website, annaweb.co.uk, to find out a bit more about me, or follow me on Instagram at annawebdogs. What's that, Mr. Binks? Yes, you're right. We will be back in your feed next Sunday. So go on, subscribe. It's free. And that way you'll never miss another show. Bye for now.